brought to you almost live from the Dude in the Basement Studios. Why? Because that's where the good stuff is. It's Sips, Suds, and Smokes with your smoking hosts, the good old boys.
Get ready to learn everything you ever wanted to know and a whole lot that you didn't. It's time for a CHATS episode.
Hello, this is Made Man Bob from Sips, Suds, and Smokes, and this is a CHATS episode where everything good in life is worth discussing. Our chat segments are all about the people behind the products that we discuss here on Sips, Suds, and Smokes, and today's episode we are very honored to have Mr. Mark Reynier from Waterford Irish Whiskey. Mark is a well-known and well-respected figure in the drinks business, starting out in wine originally and then working your way into whiskey. You were one of the people who resurrected a long mothballed Bruichladdich and spent over a decade bringing that one back to life. Moved on from that and onto Waterford. So Ireland. How did you end up there? It's just across the water, but did you do that was it on purpose, or was it more of a, I'm putting Islay behind me and I'm going somewhere else?
A bit of everything, really. From my house on Islay, you look at the north coast of Ireland.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I've been to Islay. It's right across the water. You can see it. So, yeah.
30 miles away. Yes, I resurrected Bruichladdich back in 2000, and Remy Cointreau came and bought it in 2012. And I was a bit miffed at the time. I hadn't finished what I was wanting to do.
Oh, I'm sure that was bittersweet because you guys had, you and Jim McEwen and the team there have done so much.
It's just. And it takes time. These things did take time, and we were challenging a lot of shibboleths, and we finally got it into where we wanted it to be, where I wanted it to be. But the cement hadn't set. That was my
sure.
So yes, high dudgeon, fit of peak, despondency, whatever. I wanted to go and do something else. And I remember sitting on the wall outside Bruichladdich one summer's evening with the wonderful, wonderful Duncan McGilvray, who was one of life's true gentlemen. He was our chief engineer. He was a crofter from Ireland, self-sufficient subsistence farmer. A really lovely guy, silver-bearded, silver-haired. He'd been there since the 60s. And we were talking about something. There was the impending harvest. I think that's what it was. And there was some issue, some problem, whatever. And we were chewing the cud late one afternoon, sitting on the wall, looking out across Lochindal, across the North Channel to the coast of Ulster, Ireland, in the distance. And he said, Mark, in all the years I've worked here, 45 years I've worked here. So the best barley I ever saw, it came from over there. Ireland. And I sort of remember this. And so when I was thinking of a new project, I wanted to, I demonstrated that terroir worked. If you can get a bunch of 10, 12 Hebridean farmers to debate and argue the merits of terroir in their own spirit, produced from their own barley, it works. And so I remember what Duncan said, and the logic was there too, that to go to Ireland, essentially to go 240 miles due south from where we were sitting, literally 180 degrees due south, walk for 240 miles. Yes, your feet will get wet if you did. You'd arrive, you'd pass Belfast on your right, you'd pass Dublin on your right, and then you'd pass down to the south coast of Ireland, the sunny southeast segment called quadrant of the island, and you come to Waterford on the south coast. It's the same latitude as Cambridge.
Mm-hmm.
It's sunnier, it's warmer, it's ameliorated by the Gulf Stream, it's a maritime climate, and it's glacial soils. It's infinitely better place to grow
Just
barley.
perfect for growing barley. Absolutely.
And of course, grass is the great thing for dairy cattle, for racehorses, and of course, barley is a grass.
Absolutely.
So glacial soils and that marvelous climate, I'm there for the barley. So I brought with me, a Scottish distilling philosophy, double distillation, Scottish stills. I nicked the stills.
Yeah, it was the old stills from Bruichladdich that
I'd already stolen from Inverleithen.
Yeah, okay, yeah. It was in Dumbarton. Yeah.
Well, there's quite a nice symmetry here, because 2004 was when we were raiding the Inverleithen distillery on the River Clyde prior to its demolition. And we were raiding it for spare parts. And some of those spare parts, 3 of them were stills. One of them we used to make gin, botanist gin. And the other 2 were sitting there waiting to be used. And we sort of envisaged using them for a resurrected Port Charlotte distillery, but that never happened. The 208 crash. So I took those again. So the same year, 2004, was when the Waterford Brewery was built by Diageo on the site of the brewery that had existed there since 1792. So, a great place to brew on the River Suir, S-U-I-R, Suir it's pronounced, which is tidal right there. Yet it looks like a river. It looks like a wonderful sort of inland river. It was a town, founded by the Vikings, as a safe harbor, a great place to hang out. So this 2004, whilst we were raiding Inverleithen for the stills, Diageo were building this state-of-the-art brewery, which they then shut down a decade later when they decided to centralize all their brewing activities. So here was, when I arrived in 2013, here was a state-of-the-art brewery. And of course, your readers, your listeners will know that distilling, 2/3 of it's about brewing.
A brewery is a distillery that just doesn't have a still.
That's it. So I bought the stills.
Yeah, you brought stills in and put it in the end, and now you've got a distillery. So
I had always wanted, since my wine days, I was in Burgundy in the 80s and the 90s, when they were rediscovering the principles of terroir. Terroir had been lost to them because after the war, they'd gone into cooperative winemaking, and a lot of people had leased out the land. There was the weather patterns. From 45 to 77, the weather was appalling. It's cyclical. The weather was appalling. They couldn't even get 12 degrees in sugar, without adding Tate and Lyle. Sugar. And then the weather patterns changed from 77 onwards, and now they can't keep it down to 12 degrees out. But in my time there during the 80s, this renaissance of terroir, just as single malt was taking off in the UK, so was terroir being rediscovered by a 3rd generation post-war who'd learnt it all. Learned about the science of winemaking in California, in Australia, and they'd come back and, with the point that they've got the terroir identified over 1,000 years by the monks and the nuns, walled vineyards for the best ones, and then enshrined in law, the Appellation Contrôlée law. So they had the terroir, they had that history of observation. what they didn't have was the technology of winemaking, the modern technology. They weren't making money because the weather had been so bad for so long. That all changed in the 80s. Thanks to the modernization of winemaking in Australia and California, and the fact marrying that to the terroirs that they had. Yeah. So what I wanted from that time onwards, I was greatly influenced by what I was discovering and how dramatically the quality of those wines changed. And each year it seemed to be a new discovery. Wood integration, how to integrate the great oak barrels so they don't dominate, so you have the harmony. Pneumatic pressing so that you can control the press and extract as much as you can. Extended fermentation, stainless steel, hygiene, all these things, and they all add up, they all stack up. And here was a Willy Wonka factory of all the stainless steel you could shake a stick at. It was just, and all I had to do was bring the stills. Yeah, I did.
Well, that distiller, Diageo has a habit of doing that, building a state-of-the-art facility somewhere, and then a decade later leaving. They did that here in the United States, and Max Shapiro and Heaven Hill ended up buying that distillery. But when you took that over, you went from a distillery in Bruichladdich that was much older, older technology. I know you guys brought the technology up, but you're going from that to this rocket ship.
That's right. Yeah. But we didn't change the technology. That was just it. It was a state-of-the-art distillery, 1881.
Yeah.
And some of the designs that were applied there became industry standards.
Sure.
For example, anti-collapse valves on the stills. But it was built on a slope. It was gravity fed. It was built around a courtyard. It was ergonomic. It was a very clever layout. A design, I hasten to add, that I've adopted for Grenada, ergonomic layout, which is what you can do with a purpose-built distillery. So yes, you have at the heart. And I raised my hands, hands up. I didn't know the weak point in this argument was I didn't know at the heart of the mashing phase whether that would work or not. Is it just too highfalutinly good? But my fallback position was on the other side of the lane. I had a second distillery, brewery, from 1792. This had machinery in it that I knew. Roller mills,
exactly,
mash tuns. The kit that I knew from Bruichladdich. So if I couldn't get this new stuff to work, that's what I was going to use. I was going to put that in. So that was my fallback scenario. But what we learned at the heart of this brewery in the mashing phase, at the very heart, are three things which together are unique in the world.
Well, you have the hydro mill. I don't know anybody anywhere that's making whiskey that has hydro mill. I think you're the only one.
So it's the only one, and I assume because it didn't do what they wanted it to do. But for me, it does exactly what I want. And this again, I would love to say that I knew this would happen. I didn't. This was entirely by chance. It was entirely by chance. If you go into the mill house of any distillery, and it struck me when I went back to Bruichladdich, you go into and Bruichladdich has the most wonderful mill house. It smells of barley. It smells fantastic. But that's just it.
Yeah. It's all escaping.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. But this hydro mill, commissioned, designed, and constructed for Diageo, it was designed for efficacy. It was designed for speed. But because it basically combines, it changes the whole mashing process. Instead of the mashing process being a gravity-induced exercise where you are trickling hot water through a bed of grist, flour, milled flour.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. You're drizzling water through it. So it is percolating through and taking the pre-sugars with it, and then is being released through a slotted floor that holds back the grist, but allows the sweet wort to
drain through. Yeah.
Gravity fed. Well, this turns that whole thing upside down. This isn't gravity fed. This isn't drizzle. This is a completely different system. So the water and the barley enter together down a column directly into a two-plate mill. 2 plates, 2 discs.
Sure.
Vertically orientated. One is fixed, and the other one is on the end of a shaft and turned by a motor. It means you have a precision of milling that you just cannot get from the old roller
mills or a hammer mill. Yeah.
We're not looking for a grist. We're looking for total milling. So the water and the barley acts as a lubricant. The water and the barley enter this at the same time and are milled totally. So we're not looking for grist. We're looking for for total milling.
Yeah.
And so the water and the sugar are liberated into a large mash tun, and then we heat the whole mash tun incrementally. So as the temperature rises, the enzymes that are going to convert the pre-sugars obtained during malting into sugars, so maltase, amylase, fructase, are going to activate with the water to, as it heats, they're temperature activated, to convert the pre-sugars into sugars. So now what's the relevance to me on that one? Well, the relevance to me is we're using 35 different barley origins each year. We don't know the exact temperature for that harvest, for that barley from that farm. But this method ensures we capture it. So we get a very good conversion rate.
And with all the computer technology, I imagine you're able to capture so much more data points. That allows you to individually tailor each one. As you're sacrificing that mash, you can measure better now and know exactly where you need to go.
Visual. You got eyes on what's going on. In those wonderful Victorian distilleries, you put the barley in one end and whiskey comes out the other, and you don't intervene. There's nothing you do. It just does what it does. You don't turn any taps or whereas this, of course, is full of microchips and data collection. I mean, basically, primarily for efficacy. But obviously, it also means that you can see what's happening in real time. Now, this becomes relevant when you're using all these different starting points. Now, when we the first year and a half, first 2 years, we didn't change anything. We just did the same thing right the way through, because partly we didn't know what any of the stuff did. And partly we wanted to make sure that we had a standard format, a base level. But then incrementally, we've been able to intervene. So now we bespoke everything from the malting all the way through. Everything is bespoke, because as you can imagine, every farm, every terroir, each harvest, they're different.
So when did you know? When did you know I'm onto it? I'm onto something here. This is it. And now we need to expand. Now we need to go from our baseline and start examining each one of these barleys independently.
Well, bespoking is what I call it. Bespoking. Well, it started 18 months in. And the first thing we bespoked was the malting. Maltings, if you're lucky, will change settings each harvest. And one-sized hat doesn't work.
Yeah.
We were getting very erratic conversion rates. So it became evident that thanks to nature, thanks to the soil and the wonders of nature and nurture, that we would have to malt each one to its exact. We do a little test, find out what the optimum settings were, and then calibrate and set for that. Which obviously is fiddly, but that's what we do. So it started with the malting, and then it worked through to every phase. So then it started, it was with the mill settings, and then it was the pressure, because the third part of our Holy Trinity, as I call it, the hydro mill, the incremental mash conversion. But then we have the third part, which I nickname as our terroir extractor, is we have, like the Burgundians, pneumatic presses, 54 of them in a row, that we can squeeze every last drop of flavor out of that barley. Our draft is like sawdust. Whereas most distilleries' draft is wet, and it's more like in a cereal that you have your breakfast.
And they'll put it in a roller kiln or something to dry it out, so they can then sell it, and all that flavor is still inside.
It's already dry. There's no sugar left. There's nothing left. It's actually of zero nutritional value, because we've taken everything out through the hydro mill, the incremental mash conversion, and pneumatic pressing. So that terroir extraction, it was never designed for that, but that's what it does for us.
It works.
So, in bit by bit, everything is now. Our distillers have visual on everything. You can see what's going on. So it's probably where it's most relevant in real time. It's for fermentation, because we have the ability, and it's what I've always wanted, for 40 years, is what I wanted, was the ability to control fermentation. Most normal fermentations in distilleries are entirely natural. The weather, the temperature determines a 2-day fermentation, 48 hours or 60 hours maximum. Which is one of the reasons they use wooden washbacks, because they have a sort of thermal value. And then you've got the industrial distilling, which is just 1 day, 24 hours, high density, where basically you double up the yeast to get a volatile fermentation over and done with as quickly as possible, because time is money.
Industrial ethanol, and it goes out. Sure.
We're not making the cheapest liter of alcohol possible. I am making the most naturally flavorsome liter possible. And so the ability to slow that down, and think of it like a surfer. Temperature, we're only talking about 4 or 5 degrees. So we're talking between 32, 33 degrees Celsius to 28. So it's a narrow range. But what you're trying to do is keep that temperature there, so that the alcohol that's being created, great. The dead yeast are being created, sure. Carbon dioxide is being farted off. If you have an aggressive fermentation, you end up with volatile flavors, a lot of gas, a lot of volatility. If you can slow it down, those yeast become more soporific. They eat more slowly. The fermentation runs a lot calmer, and the same volume of sugar is going to be eaten. It's just going to take them as long as you give them. So it's if we keep it to sort of 32 Celsius, 28 Celsius, around there, like a surfer riding that wave. If it's too cold, you'll collapse the fermentation, and it will stick, and that'll be a writer.
Yeah.
If you let it go too warm, well, then it goes off like a rocket, and you've lost it.
You're getting those undesirable congeners and esters that you don't want.
You're riding that wave, and we can ride it for 8 days. And we've increased that bit by bit by bit to 8 days. And that gives us an intensity of flavor that you would not normally get. So all these points I'm making are incremental changes taken together as a whole. This is what gives you this Waterford experience. So by doing it for 8 days, we've got the space, we've got the time, we've got the inclination, and we've got the equipment to do it.
Yep.
We can ride. And what that gives us is something, again, nobody has in our industry. I believe no one does it in the spirits world at all. Is it gives us a malolactic fermentation. And that's where harsh malic acid is converted into softer lactic acid. That gives you a softness of mouthfeel.
Yep.
A softness, all these things have a resolution.
Well, it's a throwback to your roots in the wine business, is what it is.
It's exactly that, because it's all about fermentation.
Yep.
And of course, this answers an even more fundamental question here, which is, where does whiskey's flavor come from? Now, you've all heard this, 80% of a whiskey's flavor comes from the wood. No, it doesn't. That's absolute poppycock. Malt whiskey's flavor comes from barley. Barley is malt whiskey's flavor. No barley, no malt whiskey. Simple as that. If you put vodka into a barrel, you don't get malt whiskey.
Exactly.
I can assure you.
Yeah.
So let's put that one to bed. That's just a lazy soundbite which needs to be addressed. What would be more correct, more honest, would be to say that 100% of a malt whiskey's flavor is influenced by its time in barrel. That's true.
Yeah.
Because what you have is not only the extractive elements of lignin, vanillin, and tannin extracted from the wood by the alcohol, and that happens very quickly. If they're there, if the barrels haven't been overheated.
If it hadn't been, 9 times over,
Exactly. But then you have the glory of maturation, which is micro-oxygenation of the 2,000 flavor compounds that are found in the barley grain, and the exact flavor compounds are found in the new spirit. They're immutable. They don't go away. You can't destroy them. There they are. And it's those flavor compounds that are being micro-oxygenated day in, day out through the wood, assuming it's not overused, because those pores get blocked up, and that maturation, that oxidation effect is reduced greatly. And we've all tasted whiskies that are 20, 30 years old that taste like they were made yesterday, because they're in barrels that were too tired. So the tired barrels have a serious detrimental impact on the maturation of the spirit, because it's slowing down or even preventing the micro-oxygenation of the very flavor there in the first place.
Well, you can take top quality new make and put it into a lousy barrel, and I will argue you'll get lousy whiskey.
That's the reason.
But you can't take average or poor new make and put it into the best barrel on earth and expect to get good whiskey out. Like you said, it's more of an aging, it's more of a maturation, as opposed to it's 80% of the flavor. It's not. And I absolutely agree with you that. And I think you guys you're proving it. Yeah.
You've got to have the flavor compounds, and they come from the barley.
Exactly.
I didn't put them there. They came from the barley. That's where they are. And my view, is a purist one. I accept that we have the most flavorsome cereal in the world, making the most flavorsome spirit in the world. So surely, to goodness, we should all be giving it its due. That's where it comes from, the barley. So therefore, fermentation is terribly important. But of course, industrially, time is money. So speed. But, I'm not interested. I want to slow it all down. I've got the space, I've got the time, I've got the inclination, because you can make or release, free those flavor compounds up by doing very little.
Yeah.
It means you've got to spend the money, and we spent £8 million on barrels. Precisely the quality of wood and the whole portfolio, and this is what makes me laugh and not so much my accountant. It's precisely so that you don't taste the wood. You shouldn't taste the wood.
Yep.
It should be harmonious.
Yep.
You should taste the barley, because that's what it's all about. The wood allows those barley 2000 flavor compounds, 60% of which are influenced by terroir. We now know from our terroir study, 60% influence, as you'd expect, nurtured nature of where that stuff was grown. And those 2000 flavor compounds are the same in the grain, same in the new make, and get this, they're the same in the mature spirit. And you're going to say, that can't be, because the mature spirit tastes different to the new make. How can that be? And we've got a paper coming out on this. So we've been working on it with Dr. Dustin Herb, Oregon State University. Very easy. What goes on? What is maturing? What is happening? And we'll report back to you on this, but I can let you know.
Definitely interested in reading that.
Well, it's basically those flavor compounds. Say, for example, flavor compound A is apples and flavor compound B is bananas. And it seems that flavor compound A and B are ganging up and giving the impression of flavor compound C, pineapple. That's
simplification, but yeah,
it's very, very interesting, and it's about how that micro-oxygenation through the wood. Think of the wood as a Gore-Tex membrane. It's allowing these molecules in constantly, which is one of the reasons we mature beside the sea, because you want that marine air. It's coming in. Just as the angel share is leaving, think of it in a facile way. If the angel share is leaving, I mean, there would be a vacuum in the barrel, wouldn't there?
Exactly.
And that was being replaced by air, which of course is what's happening.
I mean, the other thing that fascinates me about the direction you guys have gone, I mean, you've got a beautiful distillery, state-of-the-art equipment, you've got the science behind what you're doing, but the dedication to terroir, the one of the things that makes that distillery different than every other distillery that you may visit. Most distilleries have grain silos, trucks pull in, they dump their barley, it all goes into one big vat, and it's fed off as it's needed. You guys have a cathedral of barley, where each individual farm is kept separate from the other.
That's the legit.
That right there is just so different than every other distillery out there.
Well, it's true. I mean, that came from when we were doing this at Bruichladdich. When I convinced these farmers to grow, with Duncan's help, grow barley. They hadn't grown barley on Islay for 100 years. They hadn't grown it since the First World War. But basically, when none of the young lads came back. So persuading farmers to grow barley again was difficult. And I had no inkling just how difficult climatically it was. Because you're right up there in the northwest. You've got lots of gales and storms.
Yeah. You're on the edge of the ability to grow it.
The ground is very, very wet. You can't get onto it to sow it until May time. You've got to harvest it before September, because the autumn gales come off the Atlantic. The geese come back from Greenland and gobble it all up. So it's a very narrow window with very little room for maneuver. The plus side is you've got longer daylight hours. But you've got a very narrow window. There's no room for error. And we didn't have the logistics at the time to do it with the separation that it merited. And so I think Remy now, they lump it all together and call it Islay barley. But I wanted the individual farm. So the first thing I did, with the help of the Dalton brothers, when I went to Ireland, they said, yeah, I get what you're trying to do. I get this. We're going to need a big entrepot. And we're going to need to build it in a very entrepot-like way, so that we can have 35 bins that will house 130 tons of barley, that we can harvest it in the day, 3 trailers worth, and dry it overnight, because the humidity, depending on the harvest, maybe up to 20, 22% humidity. You've got to dry it down to 12 or it rots. So you've got to be able to harvest it, deliver it, dry it, and bin it in its own bin, so that we can say, this came from here, and there's the proof.
And that's one of the most fascinating things you guys have. A lot of whiskeys out there have no transparency. Some have a little, but every bottle, the bottles I have here, every bottle you have, there's a code on the back, and you enter that code, and the amount of information that is available for that expression, and there's recordings of the sounds. You can hear the birds singing. There's maps in there showing you the soil types, and I'm unaware of anybody in the spirits world, or honestly in the wine world, that goes to that great of a length.
Well, I have to do it. Because the cynicism of our industry is such that people would say, oh, well, he does say that, doesn't he?
Yeah.
And we know there is an awful lot of smoke and mirrors in this industry. It's a marketing-dominated industry. It has been by these mighty, mighty companies for a long time. And they tell everybody what to think. They control the narrative. So that terroir code is my validation. It's the verification of what's in that bottle, but it's my validation. It's my protection. Here it is. It's not just me saying this. This is blockchain derived. Here's all the geeky detail, and here's some really interesting stuff too. So, for example, those, if I say 7 days, 8 days, 6 days for the ferment, it's all there. You see it all there. But it's the whole point of having the sound file and the pictures and the films of the farm and the farmer is so you can see, and this is very important to me, as I said at the beginning, it's about barley. Barley is an agricultural produce, not what it's become, a manufactured product. There's only one letter difference, produce and product. We put it on the front here. No one notices it, but it says produce of Ireland, not product, produce. It always was a agricultural thing. Take it back to when you had a farmer, feeding his family with barley, feeding his cows with barley, and then distilling a little bit in the winter for himself. It was always agricultural. And those early distilleries, when they tried to sort of stamp out or rather control the industry by licensing. I mean, the only 2 rules they had was you had to buy a license and you had to have a still that was at least 200 gallons, basically to knock on the head everybody home distilling. And so the guys that had the barley, the guys that had the decent ground, the guys that had the ability to grow good barley, they're the ones that bought the license. They're the ones that bought the stills. They're the ones that chucked out the cows and shoehorned in the buyer, and became the original farm distilleries, which became bigger and bigger and bigger. Yeah. So it always was a terroir thing. It always was. And And so the terroir code is taking you back to reminding you it's about agriculture. It's about place. It's not a distillery. It's not a terroir is about what happens to barley. It's what happens to that plant. It's the interaction between the soil, the microclimate, the topography. Is it beside a river? Is it on a hillside? Is it north facing? Is it wind exposed? Is it, all these things that influence how that plant is nurtured, and therefore how that fruit is filled, whether it's the grape or the barley or a rose or whatever it is. So it's a very natural thing. The unfortunate thing is we don't have an English translation of the word that does it merit. So we're stuck with the French one, which to some people, they get a bit scared. They go, oh, it's a bit so fancy. And others, can use it, because it sounds very sophisticated without actually doing anything. So it's a double-edged sword. But for me, what it means, these 35 different farms each year, and remember, we've done 110 since we started. Some farmers drop us because it's too complicated. Some people come to us begging to be part of it. Some farms we identify. So we've gone through 110 different farms. So we've got this extraordinary library of terroir-defined flavors. But the aim is, yes, we can show them to you farm by farm. Real geeks.
It allows you to connect. I mean, you're connecting to the earth that, as you said, gave that produce.
And we can have fun in taking it back. And so you taste one single farm, and then you taste another one, and the differences, the nuances, the subtleties. But the main aim is to bring them together as a cuvée. Another French idea. It's how champagne is made. The great champagnes, where you take terroir-defined component wines and stack them together to create layers of flavor. That's what I've always, for 40 years, wanted to do.
Well, you're trying to make something that's better than the sum of its parts. So
correct. I mean, we can play the single farm individuality, provenance, and we can also be massively creative.
Yeah.
Got 110 ingredients with which to play. That's not to talk about barrels. Yeah, sure. Yep. We've got French barrels, we've got American barrels, virgin French, sweet barrels. Yeah, sure. Each of those farms, it goes into the same portfolio of barrels. Each farm gives us 200 barrels. That's roughly half American, half French. Vanilliness from the American, spiciness from the French. But, the differences there and there, the French oak, the staves are twice as thick as the American ones. Yeah. So you've got to use French oak extremely carefully, or it will dominate. And you're going to see this a lot because people are using French oak without really understanding how to use it. They're using it for the prestige rather than for the integration.
Sure.
It needs to be integrated. And French oak alone is too much. French oak needs to be curated. It needs to be looked at. It requires a lot of work, which means you need to be in control of your warehouses. You need to be in control of the maturation, what's going on, so that you can use that French oak. Think of it like spices. If too much and it's domineering. It needs to be supple.
Well, here's a question. How different is it now promoting a new distillery than it was back in the day with Bruichladdich?
Well, it's funny you should say that because the difference with Bruichladdich, if you remember, 2000, really, that was a sort of a two-part project. It was a sort of twin project. Part of it was like independent bottling, and part of it was distilling what I wanted to distill. So two different projects in one. We essentially bought 1.4 million litres of mature whiskey at various different ages, none of it consistent, unfortunately, which is very frustrating. back to 1964. That's what we bought, and the distillery was thrown in. Nobody expected it to actually get going again. The deal was done, but they thought, well, we'd just bottle up the old whiskey, and that would be that. But my interest was actually in the distilling bit, distilling to the principles I've just described, my Burgundian principles.
Sure.
So Bruichladdich, to me, was always very much a two-part thing. It existed; it had been there, for 140 years. No one knew about it because in the single malt era, and I loosely use the 80s onwards as that era when single malt became a thing. The interest in single malt took off really sort of after the oil crisis of 82, 83. So you had this pre-80s era, when it goes back to sort of what I call the Age of Innocence, 1973, and the oil crisis, the OPEC oil crisis, where things changed big time. And it went from those smaller farm distilleries to industrial distilling and a different set of criteria, recycling of barrels. Nobody at that time anticipated single malt becoming a thing. Macallan were doing it from 73 onwards. Sure, that very pivotal moment.
Yeah, they were the outlier.
Glenfiddich had been doing it since 61. But as a sector, it really, those whiskies that were being sold at the beginning of the malt whiskey boom, the thing that created, very catalyst, were wonderful whiskies that were distilled in the Age of Innocence back in the 60s, better wood, better barrels, better barley, both of which we now know. And that's what made single malt's name. But very quickly, those bottlings and whiskies disappeared, got used up. And then we moved to the industrial era, and that was different. With Bruichladdich, when we bought those stocks, we had stocks from the Age of Innocence, and then we had stocks from the new. And we had to comb through them, find out what was good and what was not so good, and rework those that weren't, put them into different barrels and everything. So there was. It was very clear to me that a number of things. One is that you needed to use good wood from the beginning. That if you used good wood, maturation was totally different. If you use manky old wood, it takes ages. So that sort of makes you realize that age statements are completely superfluous. And that's never more so than now, where you've got people ramming down, age matters, 25 years in shit wood is 25 year shit whiskey.
Exactly.
It's as simple as that. And of course that, people don't really like to hear that. But then I think you've got this new era of international distillers, American distillers, owner distillers, craft distillers, if you will. I hate the term, but yeah, craft distillers. I put Waterford in there. I put one or two Scotch whiskies in there. You've got a new era coming through, and they do care. And they're trying to do the best thing, some more successfully than others. There is a little bit of groupthink going on, which I think is not so clever. Everybody goes to the same consultants and then the same machinery, the same philosophies, the same wood. And so you do get a little bit of groupthink. But if people break out of that groupthink, the innovation, the real innovation, the honesty that's coming our way is to be encouraged. And I think we're going through a bit of a changeover period, I think, at the moment, where we're urging these younger guys forward, people that distill with heart and soul, before they get corrupted by, the cynicism of the industry. I think it's a really exciting time to be interested in single malt whiskey. The old guard, it's changing, it's moving on.
What's a typical day for you at the office? I mean, is there a typical day?
Well, talking to you, Bob. Talking to you, Bob. Well, no, as you know, I've got two projects. I've got the Renegade Rum project, which takes time. Sugarcane, same principle, same concept, but challenging rum as a category, which I've always thought had. You think there's no transparency in whiskey?
Oh yeah. Oh well, rum. Yeah, completely.
So I mean, a slightly different emphasis in that you're basically saying this is how I think rum should be made. French inspiration, Scottish distillation, sugarcane, and of course terroir-wise, you've got this extraordinary schizophrenic, volcanic, parcellated island, which is it's terroir for beginners. It's absolutely amazing. So it's a project I love. It's cost a fortune. It's been a nightmare to bring on. And then Waterford, which it came out of Bruichladdich. So it came out of the wine, French inspiration, Burgundian inspiration, and then it perfected. Everything I learned at Bruichladdich, and could you do this better? Logistics. It's about both projects.
Oh, I can imagine.
About logistics. You can't do what we're doing in Grenada without having built a distillery to do it. You can't do what we're doing at Waterford without having the cathedral. The logistics behind it. The Dalton brothers and everybody that helps us do it. And I don't think, I know it's probably sounds pretty arrogant thing to say, but I honestly don't think anybody will ever come close to repeating what we've done in either project. We'll play with bits of it, and you'll farm to bottle, and sure, but no one on the scale of what we've done, the rigor of what we've done, the uncompromising nature of what we've done. There is no compromise. It's all there. We share everything with you. We've got 7,000 data points. We want to share it. We want to share it with people. We're talking to data analysts. How can we show this in a meaningful way to people that would find it interesting? So we're thinking with the terroir code that perhaps what we'll do is we'll have a different level of entry. We'll have sort of geek entry and sort of academic entry, and because it's. What we did at Bruichladdich is we brought everybody in. We opened the doors. We said, "Come on in. This is how we make whiskey. This, you've all been prevented from seeing this. It's all been under the cover. We opened the doors. Come on in. We put video cameras so you could watch what we did and everything. So that Bruichladdich generation, they know how whiskey's made. What we're now doing is showing you why. We're taking it another level. So yes, we now know how whiskey is made. Blah, blah, blah. Well, this is why this happens. Why does this happen? Why does this? Why does barley grow differently in different places? Why does it produce different flavors? We're asking the questions because I want to know the answers. Because we have the most flavorsome spirit. I want to know why.
Well, I'd hold out hope, though. I really would. That is anybody going to go to the degree that you are doing now? I don't know, but are people going to go down that path?
Nobody will.
I've got some friends that have a winery out in Napa, and her brother is an absolute computer genius, and they are collecting data points like no other winery I've ever seen. I mean, to the point that they're doing flyovers and taking infrared pictures of the vineyards down to particular vines. And
there's various programs that do that.
And other people are starting to take notice, and other companies are starting to take notice. And I think if you keep on this path, I do think you're going to get a lot of people who are going to buy in. Maybe not to the extent, but you're going to bring you're setting an example. You're going to bring them along.
But Bob, the point, we're not doing it just to have numbers and stuff.
No. I'm just to get people to make more flavorful spirit.
you're talking about some various crop programs you can get, which infrared, they can show you from an infrared photograph, where mineral deficiencies are occurring, where disease is occurring, where densities are so there's various things like that exist. All I'm interested in, and it's very simple, all I'm interested in is we have the most naturally flavoursome spirit in the world, and I want to know how I can release that flavour. I'm a natural flavour seeker. That's all I am. Less is more.
Sounds great.
To do it, you have to organise yourself, and you have to have the logistics to keep it separate. Because some little shit's going to say, "Oh well, you do say that, but we know you actually don't, because we wouldn't. We'd do something else."
Yeah.
But I have to be able to demonstrate the transparent. It's why we put it in the bottle. It's here in the glass.
Yeah.
It's in the glass. Terroir, traceable, transparent. Because that's what real provenance is. You've got to have a terroir. I've got to be able to prove to you that it exists and that it's track and traceable. And then I've got to share it with you, which is transparency. Any one of those things without the other becomes meaningless. So, it's about natural flavor. That's all I'm interested in. I've equipped myself with a methodology, a logistical methodology that allows me to ensure that this is happening and to be able to prove it. So that we have this library, this extraordinary maturing library of flavors. So like the Champagne guys, like the big top Bordeaux producers, the Grand Vins of Château-Latour, the Grand Vin is the big wine because it's made up of 50 little wines, terroir defined. And from my wine days, that's what I'm doing. I'm applying that same principle that if you can ferment and distill those flavors of terroir, each one slightly differently. Of course we've got on our website there, we've got various graphs that show you these fingerprints of each one. So you can see that harvest to harvest, they're different, terroir to terroir, they're different, farm to farm, they're different. That we could, I suppose the simple way of thinking of it is, when people ask me about this, is if those music studios and they have those huge desks,
mixer boards, yeah,
and they've got, I know how many is it, 128 levers, the drums, the tambourine, the triangle, if you think of that mixing desk, you as the mixer are, I don't know, Ned Garn, I had to say, but each one of those levers is one of the 2,000 flavor compounds. They're all there. Each one, each whiskey, each terroir has the same 2,000 compounds. They're just there in different levels. According to the climate, the temperature, the soil, whatever it is. So sometimes you've got the levers right up, sometimes the levers are down, but they're all different. Some more different than others. We know, for example, that sandy soils gives us much more fruity flavors. We know that clay soils give us more spicy clove flavors. These are things that we're observing, but they are different. And the thing is, none of them are exactly the same. You can't just mirror it. They're all slightly off like that. So you're creating complexity so that when you taste the whiskey, when you give it that water in your glass, when you allow it air, like a great wine, that air is going to react with those flavor compounds just as the water is. So you need time, you need a big glass, you need a big slug of whiskey, you need water, and you need a good friend to talk to, and take your time and let it perform and let those flavor compounds come out like a giant striptease, layer by layer by layer by layer. The French have a term for it, it's called persistence. When you taste any of our Waterford whiskies, and the moment you swallow, start counting for that memory of that spirit on your brain. And you'll probably get, with the cuvee, you'll probably get 2 minutes. Now you try that with, any ordinary, jug wine or jug, whatever it is, and there is no persistence. Sort of deliberately, because they want you to drink more and more and more and more. The great wines of the world, the great whiskey of the world, had this persistence, this length of imprint on your brain after you swallowed. The more complex it is, the longer it lasts. And this is one of the fantastic ways of judging, the quality of a spirit. Now, these aren't, people, it's a blended whiskey. No, it isn't. These are single malts. Each one of these components is a single malt in its own right. From the ground to the bottle, it's a standalone, individual, single malt. It just happens to be that we make 35 of them each year. We don't
Exactly.
But we can bring them together. So this isn't one pipeline, cheapest liter of alcohol possible, and then scattered through 7 or 8 finishes. No, each one is its own, from the ground to the bottle, authentic, standalone, single malt. And that's the difference. So
that is the difference.
Yeah, the same fingerprint of Waterford, but with the barley coming from these individually different places, not from one global commodity market fed by the Ukrainian,
Yeah.
This is individual farms. Does that make sense?
To me, it makes complete sense. I produce our wine episodes on our show as well, and I started in wine many when I was too young to buy wine. So it's a concept that I'm comfortable with and something that I absolutely understand. And I think you guys are really, really onto something with this. And I'm excited to see where this continues to go. We'll wrap
older and older. That's the one thing. It's getting older and older. Because we're distilling, 200 barrels per farm. We've got plenty of maturing stock to play with.
Yeah.
So we're not going to be hindered like we were at Bruichladdich in the early days with not having enough.
Yeah.
We've got plenty, so we can let this mature all the time. And as I said, the latest, the second version of the cuvee is 50% older than that one. We're starting to get, those flavors are diverging, getting ever more evidence. So it's a very, very interesting project in that it's a living project that we're witnessing it in real time. And we're all, if you're interested, sharing in this. And you're a wine guy, so you understand what I'm talking about. And this is very much aimed at, gastronomes and enophiles and modern whiskey drinkers, people that want to know a bit more, and people that are interested in the most flavoursome spirit in the world and where that flavour comes from. Yes, we have one or two words that are a bit odd to non-wine people, but terroir to a foodie or to a wine lover, that's hot toast.
They get it. They're familiar with the term, so they understand where you're coming from. Well,
others find it absolutely scary. They go, "Oh, no, that's too much for me." Well, then there's plenty of normal standard whiskies out there. This is for people that want to know a bit more, and come on this journey of discovery, which it's a discovery as much for us as for you.
Well, all I can say is thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us and to let the audience know what it is you guys are doing here, because I think it's fascinating. I've got the last two questions.
Far away, I've got all the time.
What's your favorite part of the job?
What's the favorite part? Well, I suppose part of it is knowing that you're making something. It links back to a question I didn't answer before. I got way sidetracked, but is that you are making something. You're putting your heart and soul into something, a vision that you're bringing to life, You sort of feel a bit like how Dr. Frankenstein must have felt. You're bringing together, this mad vision, and you're sharing it with people, and it's a living thing. Mm-hmm. It's changing all the time, and you are trying to start a new brand. We talked about Bruichladdich being partly sort of independent bottler, bottling up the old
and then
partly the new distiller, but one's fed off the other, and there was a crossover point where they moved on to the new whiskies. Here we're starting. This is Bruichladdich, the second part, just the new bit. So it's a lot harder because we're starting from zero.
Sure.
The distillery has only been there since 215/16. The building since 204, the original brewery 92-5. But as a distillery, we've only been there a short period of time. So it's sharing that discovery, that enthusiasm, that honesty, the integrity of what we're doing. The smoke and mirrors I referred to before. The sort of fast and loose, the narrative control. We're having to do our own thing, and this is why we share it. This is why we have the terroir code. This is why we put the ingredients on the label. I believe we're the only people that do that, because that's what it is: yeast, barley, and water. And we're just very lucky. That's where all the flavor is.
The other question is what part of the job could you do without?
Oh God, there's a lot of traveling. There's a lot of sort of spreading the word about what we're doing, and you're up against a very well financed and organized industry. I mean, you remember Scotch whiskey. Sort of 80% of Scotch whiskey is owned by 5 companies, and 80% of Irish whiskey is owned by 1. You're up against very, very powerful competitors. This is not, here in Ireland. This is. I'm in Ireland because of the barley. This isn't, Jameson's. This isn't, This is not. This is a totally different thing. It's only single malt. That's all I'm interested in. Double distillation, barley. That's all I'm interested in.
Sure.
So it's I suppose partly you're tarred with the same brush. It's whiskey, it's Irish whiskey, and you're trying to say, but this is different. So you're constantly trying to show people that there is a different way of doing things. There is a different ethos. There is a different vision. You can do this with total transparency. You can do it and share your discoveries and your failures with people if they just want to give you the time of day. So yes, it's I suppose evangelizing about what you're doing and hoping that people will be excited as much as you are in what you're doing. And to go back to your original thing about, I hope that that in sort of 50 years time, 30 years time, that Waterford whiskey will be a thing. It will have crossed into the mainstream. Sure. And that's very, very satisfying. I saw it with Bruichladdich, and it fills your heart. You think, I did that.
I can only imagine. I mean, every distiller I know, they pour their heart and soul into what they're doing, and to see it grow and become part of the mainstream.
This is it's jumping. What's the phrase? Jumping the shark. It's that thing. So there's that. You're making something that somewhere somebody in the world is going to take a photograph of. You're going to be in a bar in Ulaanbaatar in Mongolia, and there'll be a bottle of Waterford. It's that sort of thing. It's sharing around the world with people something that you've made.
Yeah,
I suppose that's the.
But it's got to be immensely satisfying. I mean, I can't imagine.
a very slow gratification, I can tell you. And very expensive too, yeah.
That too. Well, all I can say is thank you so much for joining us and being so generous with your time.
Pleasure.
We're gonna wrap up this Chats episode. I want to thank you for joining us. And for Sip, Suds, and Smokes, this is Made Man Bob. Thank you all for joining us. And remember, life is too short to drink bad whiskey.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you're listening to us online, do yourself a favor and tap
Tappity.
the subscribe button.
Give it a little tappy. Tap, tap, taparoo.
The easiest way to listen to our show is to ask Siri, Alexa, Google, Uncle Larry, or whoever it is that talks to you on your phone. Play podcast Sip, Suds, and Smokes. We love your feedback, and you can reach us at info@sipsudsandsmokes.com. Our tasting notes flow out on Twitter and Instagram with our handle @SipSudsAndSmokes, and our Facebook page is always buzzing with lots of news. You'll also be able to interact with the thousands,
Millions and millions
of other fans on those social media platforms. Do us a favor. Take the time to rate this episode if you're listening to us online. That's a big help to us, and we get to see your feedback as well. Come back, join us for another episode, and keep on sipping.
This has been a One Tan Hand production of Sip, Suds, and Smokes, a program devoted to the appreciation of some of the finer slices of life. From the Dude in the Basement Studios, your hosts, the Good Old Boys, will see you all next time.